In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
This is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Tuesday, October 11th. I'm Donal Ware. It's Takeaway Tuesday here on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You know how we do things here on Takeaway Tuesday. We're going to start with the HBCU National Players of the Week. Bashawn McCray, the quarterback for Southern, had a phenomenal game, completed 16 of 22 passes for 275 yards. He had 2 passing touchdowns, no interceptions, rushed for another 85 yards on 10 carries, had 2 more rushing touchdowns as the Jaguars routed Prairie View A&M in that football game 45-13. And that's going to be one of my takeaways. I'll talk more about that football game. But he completed 73% of his passes, 8.5 yards per carry. And in the last 2 games, McCray is responsible for 9 touchdowns. He's responsible for 9 touchdowns as Southern just railroaded Prairie View A&M, who was one of the hottest teams in HBCU football coming into that game. The other HBCU National Player of the Week, Deion Golat, the junior, that is the quarterback for Bowie State, completed 17 of 29 passes for 242 yards, had 3 touchdowns and no interception in Bowie State's big win, 41-14 over Virginia State. That was a big football game for both teams, and so that'll be another one of my takeaways that we will certainly get to momentarily. Looking at the HBCU polls, right? So Jackson State remains at number 1 in both polls, a unanimous selection in both polls. If you look at the coaches poll, North Carolina Central remained at number 2. Alcorn State remained at number 3. Florida A&M moved up 2 spots to number 4. And A&T is now number 5, having moved up 3 spots from last week. Hampton, Southern, Prairie View A&M, Delaware State, and South Carolina State holding on to that number 10 spot, round out the top 10. In the media poll, of course, Jackson State number 1, Virginia Union moved up a spot to number 2. Florida A&M moved up 1 spot from last week to number 3. Albany State dropped back, even though the win over Edward Waters dropped back a spot to number 4. And North Carolina Central number 5, 6 through 10, Alcorn State, Benedict, Bowie State, Southern, and Langston. So let me get to this, I guess some of the aftermath from the Alabama State and Jackson State game between Alabama State head coach Eddie Robinson Jr. and Jackson State head coach Deion Sanders. So I had a chance to look at some of the video and after the game, and it looked like both kind of gave 5, and then I don't know what happened, but Eddie Robinson put his hands up. I don't know if Coach Sanders was trying to dap him up a little bit more, but he put his hands up and then walked away and turned around, and he just reading some of the excerpts. And by the way, I had a chance to ask Coach Robinson about what happened leading up to the aftermath of that football game. He did speak on it. We're going to play that video. This was from the press conference on Monday, the coach's Zoom media call that happened on Monday. Wasn't able to ask Coach Sanders about it. I had other responsibilities off the call, and nobody else asked him about ultimately what happened. But it seems like Coach Robinson felt some kind of way, some kind of disrespect. And, you know, it's just one of those things that I don't think it's as big as, you know, it happened. We're going to talk about it here on the program, just a little bit and move on from it. But you'll hear Coach Robinson's comments. I think he put it behind him, but he addressed it a little bit when I asked him a couple of questions about it on the press conference. As a matter of fact, let's go to that now.
I just want to get your thoughts. You know, I've read some quotes where you mentioned you were SWAC, or I am SWAC, in relation to what Coach Sanders may have said or what have you. I just kind of want to, can you kind of take us through that? What led you to say that? Was there a build-up there? Was there something specifically that happened during the week?
Well, I guess to me it's history, but it's still news. So I think when I looked at it, it was just a matter of, you know, we know they were a homecoming team, but obviously, you know, it was kind of how it felt on how it fell on the schedule. So I think I kind of explained that last week. You know, it was the first Saturday of October, and so and we're trying to get this homecoming tradition. So from that standpoint, that was the biggest thing about it. But to me, I guess if I'm gonna define when I say I am SWAC, to me is just, you know, it's a history of Black college that we all try to represent. And I was fortunate enough, I was blessed to walk on at Alabama State on an academic scholarship. And that's how I started my love affair with the SWAC. You know, even before that, my dad worked at the Superdome. And so I grew up going to watch the Bayou Classic, you know, rooting for Southern, but grandma would beat them up most of the time and we would win the band. So it's like the halftime show. So to me, I just think that SWAC is kind of, it goes deep for me. It means something to me. Playing in the NFL, you know, we would talk with guys who were Jimmy Smith or Ashley Ambrose, guys who were on another team in the NFL roster. I mean, you would meet after halftime, you would talk to those guys and it meant something. So we just didn't let everybody say that they were SWAC. You know, guys would be around the locker room saying, I'm SWAC. We'd be like, nah, you're not SWAC, man. You ain't playing the SWAC. You got to earn that. So to me, when I say I'm SWAC, it's about that history of going through the HBCU ranks, you know, riding the bus from here to Houston to play a game. You know, fortunately we fly now, but those are things we went through as young players coming through in the late 80s and early 90s. So I guess that's where I was from an emotional standpoint, but I don't think that had any bearing on the football game. I mean, it was a great game, great guys that played, and hopefully it can get back to the focus on the kids and not the coaches.
Last thought as a follow-up, do you have an issue with Coach Sanders or anything that he said specifically during the week or anything he said in the past?
No, not at all. I mean, we haven't talked at all during the week. We haven't talked in the past. We haven't talked since the game. So, you know, basically it's just, you know, I'm not a huge social media guy. He's more into social media, which everybody has their preference. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's been great for Jackson and great for the conference.
So that's what Eddie Robinson Jr. had to say about it. You know, we'll ultimately see what happens. It's just so much to unpack. We're not going to get into all of it. I just wanted to make mention of it because it was a story. And, you know, we'll see what happens. Obviously, the two teams aren't going to meet again this year. But Jackson State has the leg up when you're talking about that Eastern Division. But it was a story, and many stories that have happened this year. So anyway, we'll leave it there, shall we say? But you heard the comments there from Coach Robinson. You can read the comments of what Coach Sanders had to say after the game. He did address what Coach Robinson talked about him not being, meaning Coach Sanders not being SWAC. And, you know, he just kind of, you know, said, well, I mean, in essence said, well, if I'm not SWAC, I mean, well, he didn't say if I'm not SWAC, who is, but he did say, I am SWAC, you know, I am SWAC, I'm SWAC. So anyway, you can read those comments for yourself. And again, those comments are what I've read opposed to what was said, because again, on the press conference, it was not addressed. So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, Southern's beatdown of Prairie View A&M. Now, you looked at that Prairie View A&M team, and it was coming in, 3-0 in conference play, coming in really hot, and Southern cooled them down. Now, of course, we know, or you may not know, but Eric Dooley, for the last couple of seasons, the previous, maybe 4 seasons, was the head coach at Prairie View A&M, made the move to Southern, right? And I mean, he must have prepared his guys for that football game. Okay, they were ultra compared. As I mentioned, McCray had an unbelievable football game, and at the end of the day, Southern took Prairie View A&M to the woodshed, right? So now, with that big victory, you have a situation where you still have, you have 3 teams that, I would consider front runners in the Western Division. You're talking about Alcorn State, you're talking about Southern, and you're talking about Prairie View A&M right now in that order. Now we'll see, and Alcorn State and Southern still to play. Matter of fact, this weekend. So man, in that Southern Division, that Western Division in the SWAC, boy, that's going to come down to the wire. And remember, Prairie View A&M, the defending champs, but Southern put it on Prairie View A&M. So Prairie View A&M is now down a head-to-head matchup to Southern. So that was one of my takeaways also. Another takeaway, Bowie State's big victory over Virginia State. I'd have to go back and look at the tape. I think when I made the prediction this week, I believe I picked Virginia State just for the reasons of familiarity and so forth. Look, Bowie State may have lost a couple of games, but Bowie State is ready to rock and roll. Got a big game on Saturday against Virginia Union. Boy, we've got some really big games for Week 7 in HBCU football. But I'm going to tell you what, Bowie State is the real deal. That defense did its job against Virginia State. That offense was explosive. Golot did his thing at quarterback. And so Bowie State, shouldn't be fooled by those couple of losses that Bowie State had, although one of those losses was to Shaw. Not that that's a bad loss, but it was a bit of a surprise, especially when it was a good win for Shaw, but when you're the defending champs, those are games you got to win. But again, fortunately for Bowie State, it wasn't a division game. It was an intra-division game. So it bodes well there for Bowie State moving forward. So Bowie State wins out. Bowie State's going to win the Northern Division once again. My third takeaway, South Carolina State and Florida A&M. Florida A&M is playing some very, very good football right now. Lost the first 2 games, has won 4 straight, including going to a hostile environment against South Carolina State in Orangeburg. And you've got to give Florida A&M a lot of credit. I mean, it's an old MEAC rivalry, so it's not like either game or the game hurt either team. I was looking to see if we had it in attendance, 13,595. Pretty good these days, I think, for South Carolina State. I mean, you go back 10, 15 years ago, South Carolina State was packing the stadium. I remember in 2009 when Florida A&M and South Carolina State played in Orangeburg. I mean, it was 20. That was it was a windy, seemed like it was a colder day, maybe upper 50s. It was in, if I'm not mistaken, November, and that was a big time football game. That South Carolina State was the underdog in that game and came away with the victory. Florida A&M had Curtis Pulley at quarterback and a lot of other players, but South Carolina State came away with that victory. But you look at South Carolina State, so FAMU's playing well. Coach Willie Simmons mentioned, that defense, Bowler and, Isaiah Land, and, those guys are really playing some good football right now, as he mentioned. You look at Xavier Smith, really big game, his best game of the season, the wide receiver. So you're talking about a Florida A&M team that is playing well right now, maybe looking for that at-large bid to the playoffs, perhaps. I just don't see where Jackson State's going to lose another game. Plus, Jackson State's got the head-to-head against Florida A&M. I shouldn't say I don't see where Jackson State is not going to lose another game. That's not true, but Jackson State's going to be tough. And again, Florida A&M still has that head-to-head deal there. So that's going to be tough. You know, Jeremy Musa threw a couple of interceptions. Matter of fact, he threw 2 interceptions to BJ Davis, who's absolutely phenomenal. I've been singing this kid's praises ever since his freshman year, the linebacker for South Carolina State. But as I have these numbers in front of me, Xavier Smith, 5 receptions, 102 yards, 1 touchdown in the ball game. Isaiah Major's a guy that's playing extremely well for Florida A&M. He had 13 tackles in the game for the Rattlers. 2.5 of those tackles were for loss, and also had 1 sack. So you have Florida A&M playing well. On the other side, South Carolina State, not so much. You have struggles when you're talking about at the quarterback position. Now, when you're talking about Shaq Davis, the wide receiver, I mean, he's torching everybody. Did his thing against Florida A&M, had a couple of big touchdown receptions. Did his thing against A&T. So he's a pro prospect. He's got great size. You saw what he did to Jackson State last year in that Celebration Bowl. But South Carolina State, even though this is it's not conference play, so it doesn't hurt South Carolina State as much. But I think what will help South Carolina State is now you've got Virginia University of Lynchburg coming in for a homecoming next week, so you can start to get some things right leading in to conference play in the MEAC. And I think that's big for South Carolina State. South Carolina State's got a lot to fix. I mean, while BJ Davis is playing well and some individual players may be playing well defensively, collectively, the Bulldogs are not playing well, not getting that running game going either. So South Carolina State's got a lot to fix with a much improved MEAC. Had a chance to see Norfolk State and Morgan State play on Saturday in Baltimore. Norfolk State pulled that one out. Norfolk State, we remember last year was like 6-5, had a chance at that championship and just couldn't close it out at the end. And Morgan State is improved under Damon Wilson. So South Carolina State, to defend this MEAC championship, going to have to get it together and get it together really, really soon. So that's another one of my third takeaway. My fourth takeaway is a takeaway that we've been talking about for like 3 or 4 weeks, and that's undefeated teams in HBCU football. Jackson State remains undefeated. You have Benedict, who remains undefeated, got another victory. Also, you have Langston. Now, Langston did not play this past weekend. Langston didn't play, but, you know, that aside, I mean, Langston still remains undefeated on the season. And so, you know, you have these teams that are playing extremely well, that remain undefeated on the season. And who would have thought 6 weeks into the season, you would still have some teams that remain undefeated to this point. And we can't forget about Virginia Union, who's undefeated to this point as well. And congratulations to Langston, by the way, who makes the top 10 in terms of HBCU, the HBCU media poll. So those are some of my takeaways from week 6 in HBCU football. On tomorrow, either tomorrow or Thursday, we'll see how we transition, because we got to look at week 7. But I'm going to give you my top 5 players to this point in the HBCU season. We're midway through the season. And also my Power 5 rankings, the top 5 teams. I think the top 5 teams in HBCU football right now, midway through the season. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can find us on our website, boxtorow.com, also on iHeartMedia.com, and wherever you get your podcasts, as well as you can watch the HBCU Football Daily Podcast on our YouTube page or on the Box to Row YouTube page. Look forward to our next couple of HBCU Football Daily Podcasts, and we'll talk with you tomorrow on Hump Day Wednesday.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.